Okay.
You're in capable hands, Mayor Peloquin.
Great.
Hi, everybody. We're going to get started. It's welcome to the May 2021 Council of Fort Lauderdale Civic Association General Meeting. We're glad you're all here. Mary, if I could turn it over to you, First Vice President Peloquin, for the roll call.
Yep. All right. I'm going to do the roll call for the board of the Council of Fort Lauderdale Civic Associations. It's in alphabetical order. So first person I'm looking for is Michael Albetta.
I'm here.
Yay. Okay.
Hey, Mary, do you remember Romper Room?
Yes.
Remember Miss Mary? She used to hold the thing and said, I could see you.
Wish I had that power.
Okay.
Hey, I don't have that.
On that note, I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.
Okay.
Along those notes, my neighbor, his mother was Romper Room, the mom on Romper Room, by the way.
No kidding.
Believe it or not.
Wow.
Garth Graham is his name. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, do you like that?
You've gone
Small
up a little
world.
bit in my book, Steve, of important people. Okay, and as we continue, Melinda Bowker. I know she'll be here.
He's
Lewis-
in.
Sorry, I'm here.
Okay.
I was muted.
All right, and Lewis,
I am here and not muted.
Jim Concanon,
I am present.
Kathy Stubbs,
I'm here.
Abby Laughlin,
I'm here.
Colleen Lockwood,
Here.
Marilyn Mamano,
Here.
Barbara McGill.
She's sailing. She's not here.
Okay, okay. Mary Peloquin, present. Frankie Lane. Frankie Lane?
Nope.
Come later. And Dennis Ulmer.
Present.
Okay. All right, all set, Colleen.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Mary. All right, so general membership updates. The council will be purchasing or already has purchased D&O insurance. So we talked about this several months ago. It's one of the top recommendations from Jane Boland from a year and a half ago. So just a consideration for other neighborhood associations. If you don't already have D&O insurance, we went through a deep dive of the benefits and the different mechanics and terms and conditions for our insurance policy. So I want to thank Jim Concanon and Melinda Bowker for their significant work. So we will have general liability, we'll have D&O insurance for the Council of Fort Lauderdale Civic Associations pretty quickly, if not already. Also, we have updated the council on SunBiz. For those that are a registered LLC, just a reminder, you need to update that on an annual basis. That comes with a fee. And I think the only other update is we have added an agenda item. After we publish the agenda, we will have the audit committee present their findings this year. By bylaw, we are mandated to conduct an annual audit of our finances. So we will have the audit committee do their report on that. So we will go ahead and start with our presenters. We have 3 presenters this month. As always, City Manager Chris Lagerbloom, our beloved Dr. Rader. And this month we are very pleased to feature the Assistant Director of Public Works, Dr. Nancy Gassman. Since Chris Lagerbloom is running late this evening, we're going to begin with Dr. Rader giving us COVID updates. Dr. Rader, I'm going to turn the floor over to you. Thank you again for joining us this month.
Hi, thank you again for having me. Well, we can jump right into things. Things are looking encouraging. I mean, the numbers of COVID infections are continuing to come down, at least based on what I have experienced. We're by no means out of the woods. As of a couple of days ago, it was finally announced that we have had our first P1 mutations out of Brazil here in South Florida, actually in Broward County of all places. We know that that's a much more virulent variant than the original strains that we are exposed to. We also know that vaccination has been very effective. The latest numbers I've seen is that about 30% of the population is now fully vaccinated. and a larger number have at least received one vaccine. One of the things that I've been more recently, because I'm getting lots of questions about people, should I get vaccinated or not? Well, here are the numbers. We have over 570,000 people that have died of COVID. We have a population of about 330 million people. That's 580 people in this country have died of COVID. 1 in 580. If you look at the vaccine complication rates, it's probably about 1 in 6 million, 1 in 7 million, 1 in 8 million. I mean, you can pick the number you want. The issue there is that you are markedly about 12,000 times more likely to die of COVID than experience a vaccine complication. So if you put that into that perspective, I think it's very, very clear that vaccination would be in people's best interest. Now, which vaccine to get? Honestly, I look at that as whichever one you can get in your arm. That's the one you should get. People have personal preferences, as always, and I would leave it at that. As far as the mask situation, the CDC on April 27 came out with new guidelines. If you are vaccinated and you are walking outdoors with your family or immediate family, you should no longer be wearing a mask. It's not needed. You should be fine. If you're having small gatherings outdoors and you're able to space yourself out a little bit, no need for masks either, according to the CDC. If you end up in very crowded outdoor events, they still recommend wearing masks at this point in time. Now, if you are going to indoor events, the masks are still recommended unless you can be in a situation where you're separated from the other people by 6 feet, like in restaurants and stuff like that. In Florida, our governor has lifted the mask mandate. So obviously, Florida is going to go a different way. But those were the CDC guidelines as of the 27th of last month. Vaccinations. The vaccinations have changed now. Anybody 16 years and older are cleared to get vaccinated. The Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are currently undergoing trials, and the CDC will likely authorize them from 12 years and above. So trials are currently ongoing from 6 months and above as well. Those trials are currently still cooking. I personally hope that these trials are going to be forthcoming and successful, because getting the kids back in school in a vaccinated manner to reduce the risk of transmission, not just between the children themselves, but also to the teachers, is going to be of very, very great importance. So hopefully, by the time next school year comes around in August, that will be behind us. That's about it, I think, from my perspective.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rader. Things are calming down. Things feel better. Appreciate your monthly updates. Any questions for Dr. Rader?
I think Luis has a question.
Luis, go ahead.
You're muted. Luis, you're muted.
Somebody muted me, not me. I have a couple of people that have experienced COVID, and during the time that they had it, they went to the hospital and got the monoclonal antibodies. Now they have been told that they have to wait for a certain period of time before they get a vaccine. It's getting risky because right now you really don't know when that immunity wanes and everybody's going out with no mask and doing whatever. What are the risks of doing that a little early?
So as far as the vaccine is concerned, the current CDC recommendations are to wait until you have recovered from COVID, and they leave that time frame open. I would say probably 30 days, at least 30 days from when you had COVID, and no later than 3 months. That's what the CDC recommends, no later than 3 months. The reason for that,
but
people have antibodies lasting them 3 months. Beyond 3 months, there are people whose antibodies are waning, and immunization would be helpful.
And that includes people that have the Regeneron or the other type of monoclonal antibodies, same thing?
Same with monoclonal antibodies, it's a little bit longer. They would recommend to wait a total of 2 months.
2 months?
Between
All right, thank you,
month 2
sir.
and month 3 to get immunized.
Thank you.
I see 3 other hands raised, John, Jim, and Jacqueline. And if I could ask anyone that is not speaking, mute yourself, please. And then everyone can hear more clearly. So John, and then Jim, and then Jacqueline.
Great. Dr. Rader, for multifamily housing, would you have a recommendation for condominium buildings on the mask policy in common areas?
My personal feeling is for the right now, you don't know who is immunized. You don't know who is not immunized. It would be very difficult for buildings to police that. People have been quite dishonest about their status. We even know that fake immunization certificates are floating around as we speak. I would say for larger buildings, it would be prudent for people to continue wearing masks while in an elevator, for example, taking the elevator to the different floors. Some buildings now say no more than 1 family unit per elevator ride, and then you wait for the elevator forever and ever. I think if you were to wear masks and people are comfortable with that, I don't see why not allowing more than 1 family unit into an elevator. But I think it would be prudent for larger condominiums to still say, listen, wear the mask for right now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Dr. Rader. Jim?
Dr. Rader, can you comment on some of the new treatment modalities that have emerged or in the process of emerging to treat people that do have COVID or that were exposed to it?
So there are a multitude of options. So for example, monoclonal antibodies are on the market. There were 2 different ones. One is from Eli Lilly and one was from Regeneron. The Eli Lilly had its emergency authorization pulled by the FDA as monotherapy because it was deemed to not be effective. The Regeneron monoclonal antibody, which is a cocktail of 2 different drugs, is currently still authorized, but mostly for people that are not requiring oxygen, so earlier, milder disease to prevent disease progression. There is tocilizumab, which is a interleukin-6 drug that has been looked at for use in people that are sick or in ICU settings. I've used it on several patients. All of them tend to get a rip-roaring pneumonia afterwards because it interferes with their immune system. But I look at that. You're about to die or you're going to live and you're going to have pneumonia that we can treat. These are really situations where these people are already very, very advanced. Beyond that, they have looked at some other drugs, but nothing major that I've come around. So, there are still ongoing studies and there is very little data. There's very little strong data about a variety of treatments.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. Jacqueline is next. And I see Mary now has her hand raised as well. Jacqueline, your question?
Hi, my question is about the young, the under 12, with the 12 and I guess it's the 12 and older. We're trying to get the young folks back in school. And a lot of people are saying that they don't want their child to take this vaccination. How likely is it that if so many people are not going to allow their children to take this vaccination, how likely will it be for schools to really open? I mean, is that a conversation that's been going on, that the schools are not going to likely open in August if most of the kids are not going to take the vaccination?
So Colleen and myself sit on the advisory board for the schools. And plans are for the school to reopen in person comes the new academic year. And private schools are pretty much talking about eliminating remote learning, meaning the Zoom session or whatever sessions they are using to do remote learning. So the bottom line, I think the schools are probably going to be reopening in person. The vaccine for the 12 and above, the FDA will likely, the CDC will likely recommend its use in the next few days. I was expecting already to have it cleared this week. It's just a question of days. We're counting days. I would not be surprised that it will be approved. For the younger people, it's going to be following in the next month or two. But once again, you know, look at the adults. Only 30% of the adults in this country are vaccinated. We have more doses now going back to the manufacturers and staying in warehouses than we know what to do with. For the first time this week, the number of vaccinated people per day has been coming down. That means the people willing to get vaccinated can readily get vaccinated, and yet we still have a large percentage, 50% or more, that are not doing it. I don't think that that's going to be any different. These people have children, and if they don't want to get vaccinated themselves, I doubt they will allow their children to be vaccinated or grandchildren to be vaccinated. And then many people, you know, are going to vaccinate themselves, but have a higher threshold to vaccinate their children. So it is what it is. I mean, we can't, at least in this country, we cannot force people to do something they don't want to do. And those people are going to need to live with the consequences of their decisions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you, Dr. Rader. And Mary, I think, has the last question for Dr. Rader. Mary, over to you.
Well, hey, hi, Dr. JJ. You kind of touched on my question. Like my household, everybody that can be vaccinated has been vaccinated, and that's everybody from about age 20 up. So now grandchildren that are, you know, 12 to 16, I actually have an 18-year-old that's all the way vaccinated. What do you, I mean, I think your kids are a little bit younger, but I mean, do you feel the testing for I have a 12-year-old grandson. Do you feel like the testing has just been as good as it has been for this age group as it has been for the adults? And if you had a 12-year-old, would you have them vaccinated?
Okay, let's first answer the first question. Since children are much more likely to be asymptomatic than adults, I'm sure that there are lots of children that probably had COVID or currently have COVID that are undiagnosed. Because, you know, how often does a young kid have a runny nose and you say, okay, here, you know, take the tissue and go away. So yet, you know, some of these children may have COVID and are asymptomatic and may be transmitting or being a carrier. So it's very difficult to test a lot of asymptomatic people. So that population, it's going to be challenging. As far as vaccination, I've had that discussion with my wife. My daughter has started going back to school in person. She just had a nervous meltdown. She said, I want to be back in school with my friends. I'm going to be careful. And we just caved like 2 weeks ago. We just caved. As far as she's 14, so once this new regulation comes out, she would theoretically be a candidate. And I personally want to wait a month, 2 months, 3 months to see what happens as far as safety is concerned with the drug. If we don't see anything crazy happening, and if not, I probably think I would have her vaccinated. Same thing goes for my son. You know, once the 12-year-old group comes into play. Once again, if you look at the risks, as I spoke about before, 1 in 7 million chance of a serious complication with the vaccine, 1 in 580 chance of dying from COVID, I know what bet I would be taking. So it comes back to statistics.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
And then there was one more question over here that came in from Dr. Goetz that was asking, why aren't healthcare providers required to get vaccinated? This is a very difficult question. It has to do with liability. The vaccine is still under emergency use authorization. It is not a fully accredited, approved vaccine, like some, for example, like the flu shot is, for example. And many institutions would not feel comfortable mandating something that is under emergency use authorization. The vaccine manufacturers will have would not bear liability in case something adverse were to happen because they were protected. The employers, that may be something different. They may carry liability in case they force people to get a vaccine that has not gone through the full vetting process. I think, I'm not an attorney, but I would venture to say that's likely the reason.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Last call for questions for Dr. Rader. You know, I think month to month we've run out, we've exhausted our questions, we've learned everything we need to, but there's always something else, and you always know the answers, Dr. Rader. We're so appreciative of you. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Stay safe, everybody.
See you next month. Appreciate
You're
it.
welcome. You're welcome.
Okay, next up is Assistant Director of Public Works and the leader of climate resilience sustainability efforts at the City of Fort Lauderdale, the brilliant and wonderful Dr. Nancy Gassman, who's here to talk to us in advance of storm season, which is what we love, right? Getting ready and knowing about this. And I think you'll really appreciate the enormous amount of thought and effort and strategic mindset into the infrastructure efforts within the city. And I know Nancy works, you know, closely with a lot of other people in this space across the county and in the region. Nancy, it's our pleasure and honor to have you here this month. I'll turn the floor over to you.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Yes, great. So Colleen had asked me if I would talk to you about some of the events of last year and talk a little bit about how we're moving forward and have learned from the things that had happened to us over the course of 2020. Since Dr. Rader covered COVID, I'll just move on and talk about stormwater. When you consider the city of Fort Lauderdale and our relationship with water, we get water that comes from the sky in the form of rainfall. We have the challenge of sea level rise, which comes at us from the east. Because we have a very porous geology, our groundwater table is another place that's coming at us from below with water. And because of our location in the coastal region, we also receive a lot of the rainfall that's being drained away from all of the cities that are to our west. So we get it from the sky, we get it from the ground, we get it from the east, and we're getting it from the west. When you consider how the high tide comes in, and this is a graphic that shows only the high tide over the course that is predicted for the year 2021, what you'll notice is that we have an average high tide in the range of 0.5 feet. But we also get, we have a threshold in the city of about 1.3 feet, where if our high tides come in higher than that level, they will cause nuisance flooding in a number of locations. And you can see that there's a number of peaks there that exceed that level. And those peaks are part of what we call the king tide. Times when, especially in the fall, where we get tides that are much higher than the average high tide for the year. And we're all familiar with some of the challenges that come when we have these king tides, especially if you're in a more coastal region. In that bottom right-hand corner are the tides to watch for this year. And the city does a good job of advertising that information, sending out postcards to those areas that are most impacted. And we maintain a website with that information. And normally the mayor puts out a letter right before king tide season to let you know when that's going to happen. So one of the things that we have been tracking is how many times have we seen these high tides that have exceeded that flooding threshold for the city of Fort Lauderdale. And there's two things that are important about this graphic. The first one is that in 2018, we had 46 high tides that exceeded that threshold. And keep in mind that we have 2 high tides each day. In 2019, that number jumped to 170 high tides. And in 2020, we experienced about 138. The other important thing to look at this graphic is that it's laid out over the course of the year. And while the king tides are occurring primarily in the fall, we have started to see these excursions and anomalies in the tides where we're starting to see these king tides in January and February and March. And so that's one of the things that we're watching very carefully, because we have likely hit a point in sea level rise where even a regular high tide is starting to develop that exceeds that threshold for flooding in a number of different times during the year. And it's becoming a little less seasonal to the fall, and we're seeing it a little more often throughout the year. The graphic on the screen is the 2019 Unified Sea Level Rise projection that the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Compact puts out about every 4 years. If you look in the bottom left-hand corner, what it shows you is that you can visibly see that the observed mean sea level has increased over the course of just the last 20, 30 years. This graphic is telling us that based on a mean sea level at the year 2000, we're expecting to see increases in the 10 to 17 inches of sea level rise by the year 2040, and as much as 40 inches in the year 2070. And this is very important that the City Commission has adopted these projections, because we consider these projections when we are building infrastructure. When you build a bridge is supposed to last for 80 to 100 years. And so we want to be able to look at this and say, when we build that bridge, will that bridge sustain the conditions over the course of the life of that bridge? And so we want to build it for the conditions at the end of its life, not the conditions at the beginning of its life. So understanding that sea level is rising and that there are different elevations throughout the city, what this graphic shows you is that the areas in red, which is a significant part of the city, but not the entire city, are the areas that we want to look at for long-term vulnerability throughout the area. And these are our locations where we want to consider activities that we can do in order to help protect our infrastructure as well as all that private property in those various areas. And one of the things the city has done is that as we've developed master plans for our infrastructure over the last 5 to 7 years, we have incorporated the most recent Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact sea level rise projections and the most recently available sea level rainfall predictions moving forward. So our seawall master plan has included this information so that we can build more resilient seawalls. Our stormwater master plan included these predictions and projections in our modeling for the stormwater work. Our utility master plan for both our water and wastewater system also included an understanding of what sea level rise would do to our infrastructure. Our parks master plan and even our cemetery master plan all included the idea of we need to think about sea level rise and future conditions when we're thinking about improvements in our infrastructure. All of that different information feeds into our investments in resiliency that are captured in the city's community investment plan. And that's our 5-year capital improvement plan, where literally millions of dollars are considered to be spent over the course of a 5-year time frame, prioritized for those things that we believe are most critical to perform each year. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk to you just a bit about drainage so that you can understand what some of these challenges are. The city of Fort Lauderdale is built like many other systems, with the exception that we are close to the water. The whole idea of a storm drain that you can see in front of that house is that the storm drain is below the crown of the road, that the houses and the first floors are built higher than the crown of the road. And so when it rains, the rain runs off the yards, it runs off the roads, and then it goes down that storm drain and down a hidden pipe into a discharge point. And in many cases, that's the canals behind people's houses. But that's true whether you live right on the water or whether you live 5 miles away. Eventually, the stormwater does discharge into some water body. But what happens when we have these more extreme high tides? And before I switch the graphic, you'll notice that the end of that pipe is above the water level. And that allows the stormwater that's coming from the sky to move very easily through the pipe and discharge into the ocean. But what happens when we have these very, very high tides is that Mother Nature takes advantage of the city of Fort Lauderdale's infrastructure, and the water runs up the pipe, up the storm drain, and then floods the roadways. And so many of you are well aware that we have been installing something called a tidal valve. And that's a one-way valve that gets put in the system so that we can prevent water from the sea from running up into our storm drain system. And to date, we've installed over 170 of these devices, with about 200 more planned over the course of the next 5 years. And many people ask, well, do these things really work? The tidal valves that were installed in 2015 were some of the earliest valves that we installed. The storm drain is below that. No, that's not correct. The green arrow is there just to give you a reference point. So this was a very, very high tide on September 28th. When we came down to a low tide, we went in, we installed a tidal valve in the catch basin that was causing the flooding. And this is the very next day, with the green arrow showing you the very same place during the next very high tide. And you can see that that tidal valve provided the protection for this roadway, which prevented it from getting flooded from those high tide events. So the tidal valves can be very effective in reducing the amount, the frequency, intensity, and duration of flooding into our coastal neighborhoods. But again, Mother Nature has a way of finding her way to create mayhem. And we also have the challenge of seawalls that aren't as high as the incoming high tides. And so in this scenario, this is a picture of Cordova Road. The high tide came over the seawall, over the right-of-way, and then flooded the street. And so we got a lot of phone calls saying, hey, our tidal valves aren't working. Well, tidal valves are working. They're preventing the water from coming up the pipe, but the tidal valves aren't going to prevent the water from coming over the seawall and then backfilling the catch basin from the water that's coming over the seawall. And so in order to address that, the city adopted a seawall ordinance that sets minimum and maximum elevations. And we have cited a number of neighbors, including ourselves, for allowing tidal waters to come into the public right-of-way or impacting adjacent properties. And I came to you about 2 months ago to talk about a change that's coming forward related to that ordinance, where Broward County is requiring a new tidal barrier standard so that the minimum elevation of new seawalls would have to be at 5 feet. Our current minimum elevation is 3.9 in the city's ordinance. And because the city recognized that some of their seawalls were also causing this issue, we have spent literally millions of dollars to install 2 brand new seawalls, one at Isle of Palm and another one at Cordova Road. The one at Cordova is about a ½ mile long. The one at Isle of Palm is about 900 feet, linear feet. And the picture in the upper right is at a very, very high tide in September of last year. And you can see that the roadway is completely dry. And so these seawalls are an effective protection against the tidal flooding that we see. So since we're talking about this extreme high tide that we saw last September, this is a graphic that shows you the height of the tide over the course of September 1st through September 21st. The blue line is the predicted height of the high tide. The red line is the actual observed height of the tide. So what you can see is that in the beginning of September, the predicted height and the observed height of the tide was about the same. But over the course of the month, the observed tide was coming in higher and higher and higher, to the point where it came in 16 inches above predicted. And you'll recall that I said that our threshold for flooding is right around 1.3 feet. Well, the tide came in close to 2.5 feet. So that was over a foot higher than our flood threshold. And we did see a number of areas that flooded very deeply because this very, very high tide. And the tide came in almost as high as the storm surge that was associated with Hurricane Dorian 1 year earlier. So we started to see rather extreme tidal flooding in the September timeframe, and then October happened. And what happened in October was not water from the sea, but rather water from the sky. And as you look over the 40 days in this graphic, starting in October 1 and working our way to November 10th, November 19th through 21st, we got 8.2 inches of rain. The city's stormwater system can basically handle 3 inches of rain in a 24-hour period and make sure that the roadways can drain and stay dry so they continue to be accessible. Once you go over 3 inches of rainfall in a 24-hour period, you get road flooding. And so certainly in October 19th through the 21st, we had road flooding because we got so much rain. Just a few days later, we got 6.3 inches in a 24-hour period in a situation where everything was already pretty wet and saturated. And then 2 weeks later, Tropical Storm Eta came through and dropped 10 inches of rain on us in about a 24-hour period. And so these are very extreme conditions that the city experienced, that none of our infrastructure is built for this level of extreme rainfall. And people need to understand that, because most infrastructure is built for high frequency events. What's a likely rainfall event that's going to occur over the course of 365 days? And that's the way these systems are built. They're not built for the rare rainfall event where you have 10 inches of rain happen in a 24-hour period. So when that occurred, remember we talked about water from below. Our groundwater table in October was already fairly saturated. We were at about 4 feet below ground. I want you to look at the axis on the right side, which is the depth to water level. So in early October, October 3rd in this case, we already had an elevated groundwater table, which was 4 feet below surface. And then we got the October rains, and now the water table was 2 feet below surface. And then we got the October 25th, and we were very, very close to full saturation, where there was no difference between the water on the surface and the water a few inches in. The groundwater table was at the surface. And we hit that mark when we got Tropical Storm Eta's 10 inches, where the system was completely and totally saturated, and water simply ran over the surface of the land wherever it could go. And even though it came down over the course of November, it was still fairly high by the time we hit Thanksgiving. We had gotten so much rain. And that caused widespread flooding throughout the city. And not just our city, but every city in Broward County. So we had essentially 15 or so neighborhoods that reported rather extreme flooding events throughout this time frame, especially after Tropical Storm Eta, but not exclusively. The October rainfalls had caused flooding in a number of other areas, and not just street flooding. There were absolutely some areas that had homes that became flooded because of these extreme rainfall events. Now, it's important to understand that, again, the infrastructure is not built for this much rain in this short a time, and that when we're trying to determine if we're going to make major investments in our stormwater infrastructure, one of the criteria that we use is there standing water on the roadway for more than 3 days? And there were a number of areas where they had homes that flooded during Tropical Storm Eta, and the very next day, the roads were completely dry. And again, it was just a matter of too much rainfall, too fast, and the system could not clear it away fast enough. That doesn't mean that we aren't paying attention to these impacts. As you look at the graphic and these various neighborhoods, we have pending construction in 7 of those neighborhoods for major stormwater improvements at a neighborhood level. In addition to that, we are looking to do additional planning and design work in the neighborhoods that are shown in the yellow. And that following Tropical Storm Eta, we made significant investments in the Melrose Park neighborhood in order to address the impacts that they had experienced. That's not to say that there aren't other projects that are being planned that are more at a street level rather than a whole neighborhood level. Well, where's the money coming from? We have been applying for grants throughout the last 6 to 8 months, and we were very pleased to hear that we are going to be awarded $10 million for improving the stormwater infrastructure in the Doors neighborhood. We recently were told that we are a finalist for getting funding to elevate the city-owned seawalls on Hendricks Isle. We are hoping for funding for construction for the stormwater master plan neighborhoods in Dorsey Riverbend, Progresso, Victoria Park, and Southeast Isles to be available before the end of the year. And we already have funding for River Oaks and Edgewood. Both of those projects are currently in bidding, and we expect to be able to start construction this summer. One of the things that we do include in our adopted community investment plan is a designated map for what we call adaptation action areas. Those are areas that are of concern for coastal flooding, regardless of the reason, whether it's water from below, water from the sea, or water from the sky. And over the course of the last 5 years or so, we've completed 14 different projects in these major areas. There are 42 capital projects currently listed for funding. As I mentioned, we have about $130 million pending for stormwater master plan implementation. We hope to have that funding before the end of the year. And we are moving forward with a number of projects that will elevate city-owned seawalls and also provide stormwater improvements in some of the smaller street level projects of concern. Excuse me. So one of the things that Colleen asked me about is, wet season's about to be upon us, June 1st. What are some of the things that people should be considering in order to better protect their homes moving forward? The number one protection against flooding concerns is to buy flood insurance. Again, the city system will protect you from everyday rainfall. It is not designed to protect you against extreme rain. Buying flood insurance is one of the least expensive and most effective ways to reduce your risk related to losses associated with flood. Another thing is you should know your flood situation. Know what kind of a flood zone you're in, know what parts of your neighborhood flood, and be aware that that is an issue that you need to watch for. Take protective measures for your home. If your home flooded last year, and you know that if you raised a threshold by a certain number of inches, or if you had an area that in your yard that flooded and you have an opportunity to provide fill for that area, take protective measures to protect your home. Be aware of where you have potential avenues for water to get into your home and try to address those. Another opportunity is to stage protective materials before a storm. When the city knows that we're going to have an extreme rainfall, we get lots of phone calls saying, are you going to be giving away sandbags? If you know that your house floods on a regular basis, or that your garage regularly floods if we get more than 4 inches of rain, you should have sandbags at your home. When the city gives away sandbags, they usually give away something like 5 to 10, which is usually not quite enough to provide the protection across, for example, a garage door. So be prepared. Most of us have a hurricane kit. Even if we don't know if there's a hurricane coming, we have a hurricane kit. We have protective materials available for us. It is no different than when you come into rainy season. If you have the ability to stage some protective materials before a storm, please do so. And the other thing I would encourage you to do is to take pictures of your property before the event so that you can demonstrate what those impacts may have been, and watch the weather and tide. A lot of people needlessly lose their vehicles because they tried to go out before a rainfall event. They didn't believe it was going to be 5 inches of rain, and then they drive their car through a big puddle, and it turns out that that big puddle eats their car. The other thing is that for those of you that live in areas that do get tidal flooding, that is salt water. We all know how corrosive salt water is. Driving your car through those areas is not a good idea. And if you can stay home and not drive your vehicle through those areas, that is one of the best ways to protect your property. What about reporting? If you see debris blocking a storm drain, please call it into our 24/7 customer service center. Just because a storm drain isn't draining doesn't mean that it's blocked, but if you see debris on the storm drain, please call that in. We are going to experience temporary street flooding, which is more likely if it's raining and it's high tide. Because when I showed you how those tidal valves are really valuable in preventing that ocean water from coming up into the street, as long as the ocean water is pushing against the one side of the valve, it cannot open. So if it's raining during a high tide, there's no way for that water from the sky to get out of that street. Give it a few minutes, give it a few hours. As the high tide goes out, that storm water is going to go out. It's not because your tidal valve is not working. It's because it's high tide. The other thing is, following a rain event, give stormwater time to dissipate before you report it. Again, our system can handle about 3 inches in a 24-hour period. If 5 inches of rainfall, give it some time before you report that there's a problem, that your street's not draining, because the water needs time to saturate into the ground to discharge through the storm pipes. That is not to say if there is a critical and real emergency on your street that you shouldn't report it. You absolutely should. But don't just report my street's flooded and while it's still raining. We know your street's flooded while it's raining. And again, don't drive or walk through any type of standing water. It's just dangerous. You don't know what's under the water. If there's power lines down, if there is a pothole in the street, if there is any kind of hazard below the water, you can't see it. So please don't walk or drive through standing water. You've given me an enormous amount of time and your attention. Thank you so much. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that I can at this time.
Okay, so we have a couple questions already. 3 questions, 4 questions. Okay, you're not done yet, Dr. Gassman. So let me just start out by saying that has to be one of the best explanations for the frank reality of our world against a backdrop of significant effort and targeted intervention mechanisms. So very, very pleased and very, very grateful to you. I have 2 questions. I will wait till the end because I want to make sure if other people have the same question, we don't duplicate. So the order in which I saw hands raised was Abby, Jay, Leanne, and Michael. So if we could go in that order for each of you to ask your questions.
Yes, Dr. Gassman, thank you for all your information. There's been a lot of discussion about building tunnels in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm just wondering from an engineering perspective and a water table perspective, how would that work? How would that be done?
So I think the first thing you should look to is the fact that we have one of the southernmost tunnels underneath a river in the area, and that's the Kinney Tunnel, which is the US 1 goes under the New River. And that is technology from the 1950s. So the technology is certainly there to allow us to build tunnels into a saturated groundwater table. So the technology is there, our ability is there. This is a new construction process that they're talking about for the tunnel that is currently being discussed. I don't know if that technology has been tested in this type of an environment, but that is certainly something we all need to be aware of, and the engineers are certainly going to take a very close look at that. But there's already examples in our area where you can have a successful tunnel for transit in the area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. Thank you, Nancy. Jay, I believe you're next.
Hi, Dr. Gassman. Great to see you again. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. Really appreciate it. I was hoping that you could just add a little more color on those areas that you had identified were prioritized for planning and design. If you'd like, you can flip back to that slide so everyone can see. In the Tarpon River neighborhood, for example, when we had those really heavy rains, we a number of our side streets within the neighborhood sat underwater, impacting homes for up to 2 weeks, similar to what we saw in Melrose Manors. Perhaps it didn't get as much attention as some of the other areas. But yes, these areas that you identified in yellow, can you give us a sense of, what the timing is for that and how quickly these neighborhoods can expect to see improvements to help alleviate these issues?
Right. So the first thing that you should be aware of is that we have two different types of projects. We have operational projects, which are projects that are of a certain cost, less than $100,000, that we can do on sort of a property by property level from year to year. And so when there are opportunities to make small improvements that will help drainage over time, we will make those improvements over the course of the year using what are called operational funds. And then there's the capital improvement projects. And the capital improvement projects are much more expensive projects that usually are of a larger scale. And then those are planned over the course of the 5 years. In this graphic, the yellow represents the next phase of the stormwater master planning process, where instead of doing small, we'll call them Band-Aid fixes, that a comprehensive approach will be taken in order to address the concerns of those various neighborhoods. And so Tarpon is one of the neighborhoods that's prioritized for that planning and design activity. That's likely to be started in the next year or so, with the expectation that we will be going out for additional bond funding in the 2025, 2026 timeframe to install the designed improvements into those neighborhoods.
That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jay. And Leanne and Michael, and we have one last hand raised from Virginia Dill Russell. So you will go last. Leanne, your turn.
Well, thank you so much for your presentation. One of my neighbors has a situation where he believes that another neighbor is causing water to be backed up and not reaching the drains because of some planting kinds of things. And I didn't have a good answer for him, but is there some kind of forum he can go to, or is there people that can come out and evaluate if that's the case? And if so, require the other neighbor to make corrections to their landscaping to prevent this from happening?
So it's not a simple answer. It's a case-by-case situation. The area between the sidewalk, if you have sidewalks in your neighborhood, and the roadway is usually a swale area that helps provide for drainage. If someone has made extensive plantings in the swale area, which is impacting drainage, that is something that you can call our 8,000 number, 828-8000, and call that in, and someone will come and investigate. In a situation where someone is developing the property next to yours, and they have developed in a way that is causing water that used to be on their land to run off and flood your land, you can contact the Department of Sustainable Development and determine whether they built consistent with their permits, which should have required them to hold a certain amount of stormwater on their own property. So it really depends on what that individual impact is from one house to the next.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leanne. And occasionally we have volunteers in our neighborhood that run around to clean out stormwater drains. I think the city also has a program under Hal Barnes' leadership, Adopt a Drain. So we can talk about that later. Okay, more hands are raised. Okay, so Michael, and I know Virginia is not your name, sir, but that's what I'm gonna call you. Michael, Virginia, Nicole, and Ann. So that's the sequence. Michael, over to you.
No, I believe she answered my question through her fabulous presentation. But thank you.
Yeah, but she hadn't called over you.
And I meant Michael Madfis as well. So Michael Madfis, over to you.
Hi, thank you very much. And Dr. Gassman, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm concerned about Flagler Village, and I can't quite tell from the graphic if that is the most easterly sort of odd-shaped rectangle. that is designated maybe for some funding or some work. Yeah, around where you're, or is Flagler to the?
Flagler's in between
Okay, that's
Progresso Village and Victoria Park.
Oh, that's Victoria Park. Okay, so yeah, so we're not necessarily designated for anything. I don't think we have a per se a flooding problem, though. Of course, we had rivers during the October experience. But what I noticed on a regular basis, and this is really what my concern is that we have areas that are completely paved along Flagler Drive and a little bit east of there. And I'm sure they exist elsewhere, but those where I'm thinking about. These are the warehouse areas that have not been redeveloped and may not be redeveloped for a while because they are generating some revenue as they're being used. And they flood regularly, I mean, on almost any rain, to the point where a pedestrian cannot really use any of the pedestrian facilities, whether it's at an intersection or sometimes even along the street or crossing the street. And there's really a lack of, landscape area there to, and it all relies totally on the stormwater, structures. And they don't seem to have the capacity, or water doesn't get to them because these areas have been patched or paved in such a way that it doesn't flow any longer. And there seems to be no enforcement of sort of that swale condition you referred to there, even in new construction. They curb a lot of it so water won't get into it. And so I'm concerned that if there's no work in that area for a number of years, we're going to see this every, from now, every rainy season. And I see children stand at the corners on their way home from school and have to call their parents to pick them up from that corner because they're afraid to walk into that water. Like you say, you don't know what you're going to come against. And this is not just in a high storm event. This is regularly. So that's my concern, is that we have these sort of continuing conditions and maybe there's no one paying attention to it or grant money because it's not related to an extreme condition.
Okay, so great question. The neighborhoods that are outlined on this screen that we have targeted for major investments are the mega projects. We regularly do, as I mentioned before, capital improvement projects that are kind of on the street level. And we also are doing operational projects on a regular basis. The stormwater operations team within the city proactively cleans our catch basins. We inspect all of our catch basins. We try to do it twice a year. So our experienced inspectors are looking at every catch basin in the city that belongs to the city twice a year to make sure that they are staying clear. But we've also are hoping to start this calendar year with a proactive swale improvement project where we are going into neighborhoods and not doing one swale, but looking across various streets and trying to do a swale rehabilitation throughout those various areas. Again, if you are seeing water standing in a given location for an extended period of time, or you're seeing the sidewalks are getting wet and staying wet for an extreme period of time, please call those in and they will be evaluated and determined if there's something we can do that can help resolve that issue, either in the short term or some type of a longer term fix. But swale rehabilitation is one of the things that we do on an often on a regular basis, and we have an entire team dedicated to doing that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we have 3 more questions and then a written question from Dr. Getz. If I could ask each of the folks going next on asking the questions, if you could keep your questions brief. Yeah, 15 to 30 seconds max kind of explanation for the questions out of respect for Dr. Gassman's time and for us to move along. So Mr. Russell, your turn.
Yes, I'm asking a question for Croissant Park. Every storm drain in our neighborhood is of a French drain nature. I don't think we have a single storm drain that drains into the river or a canal. So we're very susceptible to heavy rain, and then heavy rain comes with generally a storm tide, which raises the water table in the ground. What can we possibly do to alleviate the flooding situation that we're beginning to have here?
So our stormwater manager lives in Croissant Park. So she is very well aware of the challenges in the area. And I'm just going to focus in here. Are you guys seeing my slides? Or are you seeing a map?
We're seeing
Oh,
a PowerPoint slide deck, but not in slideshow mode.
Okay.
we're seeing a map, but it's very small.
Okay.
There, it's bigger. Now it's bigger.
Oh, so you are seeing the map?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What's your address, sir?
My address is 708 Southwest 16th Street.
708 Southwest 16th Street. Just want to make sure I'm in the right place. So the way that this graphic works.
So Nancy, there's no map. You're still showing your slide deck. So
okay, I'm going to stop
I think
sharing.
you gotta stop share and reshare. There you go.
Okay, there's a map.
Okay. So what you're seeing on this map is a snapshot of all of the storm drain systems throughout the area. And in your specific neighborhood, your house is that red rectangle.
Okay.
Those 4 catch basins that are on that street, you are absolutely correct that that's an exfiltration system. But in areas not too far from your house, there are more extensive stormwater systems throughout the area. Croissant Park is one of those neighborhoods that has a rather generous swale system. And in situations where you're seeing a lot of flooding, again, if you call the city and ask if the swales can be rehabilitated on your street, we will come do an assessment. And swales are incredibly effective at reducing flooding. I live in Hollywood, and the only storm management system in my neighborhood is the swales, and they can be very effective at reducing flooding in the area. So again, if you have issues with swales along the area, feel free to call 828-8000. Let them know that you would be interested in having your swale rehabilitated, for example, and they'll come out and do an assessment.
How about if we want our neighbor's swale rehabilitated?
You can certainly call in that you're concerned that you're getting more water and your next door neighbor's not. And it, again, depending on case by case basis, depending on the assessment of the area and our approach of that neighbor, if appropriate, we would usually ask their permission to rehabilitate their swale. But we can also rehabilitate it without their permission, but we try not to do it that way.
Okay, all right, fair enough, thanks.
Wonderful, great questions and great answers. And Dr. Gassman, again, just terrific, and thank you. So 2 final questions. Ann Hilmer, over to you.
Hi, Dr. Gassman. Will your presentation tonight be available so that we can download it and print it to study it further?
It scares me a little that you want to study it, but I've already provided it to Colleen.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for the short question, Ann. So we have the file, but it will not have the animation. So it's a PDF version of what we just saw. So we will share that out and link it on the council website. Last but surely not least, Nicole, over to you.
Hi, thank you. This is Nicole Chavaco from Edgewood Civic Association. Dr. Gassman, I know you've been CC'd on multiple emails over the last several months regarding stormwater improvements in Edgewood. So there's been multiple delays. At first, we were told that the groundbreaking in Edgewood would be in February. And then in March, we were told it was going to be in June. And about a week ago, I asked for another update and we were told the fall.
Yep.
So I understand that there's delays in place, but there's this new concern with residents, and they're bringing that concern to me of what happens with the funding. Does the funding expire? Is there a certain allotted time where it needs to be used? There's this fear of all of these delays happening and our neighborhood losing funding.
So the funding for Edgewood and River Oaks is in the form of a line of credit. $70 million has been set aside for those two neighborhoods, and that does not expire. The city is currently pursuing the full amount of $200 million for the funding that would pay for all 7 neighborhoods. It would allow us to pay back the line of credit, and then it would also provide the money for the other 5 neighborhoods that we have not yet funded. The money will not expire. The additional $130 million, the city is pursuing 2 separate sources for funding. One is a special loan from the EPA, which is a low interest loan. Some people refer to it as the WIFIA loan, WIFIA. Right now, we have our application in for that, and we should hear in June if we qualify for an additional $100 million in funding to support the stormwater program. And then we are also going through what's called a bond validation to get the additional dollars to fill out that additional up to $200 million that we would help pay back that line of credit that is currently in place for Edgewood and River Oaks. Both Edgewood and River Oaks are in procurement right now. They're out for bid. We cannot go out for bid unless the money is secured for the program. So unless you have the money in the bank, you're not allowed to put something out to bid. So I don't know if that brings you any level of comfort, but the fact that those two neighborhoods are out to bid means this funding is secured, and we will be moving forward with those improvements.
No, that's helpful. There's been a lot of questions lately, not only from Edgewood, but I'm getting questions from River Oaks too with concerns. So no, that's very helpful.
In River Oaks, we actually have a major project going on right now related to the River Oaks Stormwater Park, where we've been doing a substantial amount of reworking the conveyance through an area that is going to become a park, but the conveyance will allow for stormwater to go in that area. Edgewood and River Oaks are connected in terms of the stormwater improvements because there's going to be a major pump station, stormwater pump station that will be installed in River Oaks, and Edgewood will be connected to that pump station. So rainfall from Edgewood will be drawn up to River Oaks and then discharged. The other thing that's going on in your neighborhood is that one of the reasons Edgewood has a tendency to flood, number one, is that there's almost no infrastructure whatsoever. There's almost no catch basins in the area. I have it up on the screen right now. Whoops, too fast. I don't think I'm going to be able to scroll back out. Sorry. But there's almost no infrastructure in Edgewood at all. You don't see any of those pipes. You don't see any of those connections. So right here, you can see there's a couple of pipes here. There's a couple of pipes at the end of Southwest 32nd. There's some private pipes associated with this neighborhood, but this development. But generally, you see that there's not a whole lot of infrastructure in this location. And the water that comes off of the airport drains to the north toward this neighborhood through the Osceola Canal. And one of the major projects that we are doing right now is dredging the Osceola Canal to improve the conveyance through that area. So even though we're not working on the big project in terms of construction, there are these other smaller projects that are all part of the bigger picture that we are working on in order to improve the drainage in your neighborhood and the neighborhood to your north.
Thank you so much for that answer. I'm happy to share that with the neighborhood. Thank you.
Okay.
Fabulous, fabulous, fabulous. So Dr. gets this question here. How long before it is probable that a storm surge will overtop the new seawalls, and what will the damage cost? I'm not sure we can answer that now. Over the long run, maybe we should invest for a low frequency event. So more like a suggestion, perhaps. So I don't know if you want to address that. And Luis is asking, the maps are amazing to look at. I don't know if those are publicly available as well. Okay, they're not. All right.
Yeah.
So not right now. All right. So in answer to Dr. Guess's question, and then I have one final question to ask, if you don't
Okay.
mind.
The short question to Dr. Getz's question is that we could get a storm surge tomorrow that will overtop all the seawalls in the city. The highest storm surge that we've seen since I've been at the city of Fort Lauderdale has reached an elevation of 2.6 feet. That's the highest I've seen. We haven't had a significant storm surge since the 1950s in the city of Fort Lauderdale. So at any time, again, storm surge is a more extreme event. One of the examples that I like to give is that the tsunami that hit Japan overtopped a 15-foot tsunami wall that they felt was high enough to deal with a low frequency event, and they got a 23-foot tsunami. So investing for low frequency events is very expensive, and you have to balance the public good and the risk in order to address those concerns. How much will the damage cost? It's one of the reasons that you can rely on certain infrastructure for daily events, but flood insurance, home insurance, these are other ways to mitigate your risk and mitigate your loss in time. And you had another question for me, Colleen?
Yes. So, and I think this question is kind of where Leanne is headed. There are neighborhoods, and neighborhood boundaries aren't the same thing as where flooding and drainage issues occur, right? So sometimes there's a street over or two, as in the case of Flagler, right, between Progresso and Victoria, where there are street level needs. We talked about swale rehab and other things, but I think if we had street level concerns, we just call that number, and we can pursue options with you if we're in one of those adjacent neighborhood areas that might have some issues. You know, I know there are several neighborhoods like that.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, improvements that are happening in River Oaks are going to provide a huge benefit to Edgewood. The Dorsey Riverbend improvements are also going to benefit the Doors neighborhood and vice versa. Progresso is also going to be, if I have my designs in my head appropriately, I believe we're also putting in a stormwater pump in Progresso. So high water tables around the area will be drawn through that stormwater system and interconnected systems to help reduce the flooding in the adjacent areas as well. So we are a substantially interconnected system. So it really depends on where you are. And
that's excellent. That's excellent. That's perfect. So I'll ask my simple last question. You may know, you may not know, others on the call may know, but in the event that people do want to, you know, prepare ahead of time and get materials for their home, where do you buy sandbags? I don't know. Is there a sandbag depository somewhere that you can go and say, I want, you know, 100 bags or 1,000 bags or whatever the number is that you need?
So there's two answers to that question. Depending on how much you need, you can go buy 40-pound bags of sand at Home Depot or Lowe's. Don't buy too many at a time, you'll ruin your shocks. The other answer to the question is there are companies like Granger where you can buy just the bags, and then you can order sand from a number of different companies, have them drop 2 yards of sand on your driveway and bag your own. But yeah, there are absolutely companies out there where you can buy sandbags and where you can buy sand.
Wonderful. That might be something we can follow up with. So, Dr. Gassman, again, you saw the proliferous questions coming to you, but also I think the deep appreciation for just an excellent presentation. Again, we'll share that out. If folks could share their thanks and gratitude to Dr. Gassman in the chat, that would be terrific. Hope you'll come back. And really, really terrific. Thank you so much.
Again, thank you for your time and attention on this call, and always happy to have a chance to talk about these issues with you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So we now have City Manager Chris Lagerbloom on to give us city updates. But before we go there, I just want to acknowledge a very special person on the call tonight. For those of you that did reach out to her prior to her surgery, she went through that successfully and she is fine. And we don't normally do this, but this is such a beloved institution for the city of Fort Lauderdale. If everyone could give a shout out to Betty Shelley, who's on the call, and I am going to give Betty, 30 seconds of the floor if you would like to say hello and tell us how you're doing.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all of your wonderful calls and cards and everything that it's just been overwhelming to me. And I am getting better slowly. It's slowly for me because I'm used to being active and not having to take tiny steps. But thank you, all my friends there in the council and all around. You're just wonderful people and I love you all. Thank you so much, Colleen.
Thank you, Betty, and we can't wait to hug you in person. I know
that would be great. Thank you.
No, thank you and much love. All right, Chris, thank you again so much for joining us. I know you've got a very busy schedule. Appreciate you being here again this month. We're going to turn the floor over to you to give all things city updates, and I think we have a handful of questions for you as well. So over to you, Mr. Lagerbloom.
Perfect. Good evening, everybody. So thank you for having me. Sorry to be a little bit late, but that was an engaged and informative presentation and discussion on our stormwater system as it currently exists. And as we look to make modifications to it in the future, Dr. Gassman's always a wealth of information when it comes to projects like that. I'm even fascinated listening to where we can get better and how we can enhance our infrastructure. So I know that was a long presentation. I'll be very brief tonight and just talk about a couple of things that are current, and then certainly be happy to take questions. So every meeting seems like the last year we've talked about COVID in some respect. I can tell you this week, our pivot was to starting to get behind and push out information on how COVID vaccines can come find you at your home. What we have found in discussions with the state and others is that there's just simply not a crowd going to the COVID vaccine sites any longer. The site that's at the Drive Pink Stadium up at Lockhart will be demobilized this Friday, and those resources repurposed. So Snyder Park's going to stay open for a while. But what I'm hearing from our friends at the Emergency Management Group in the state is that there's so many vaccines available at Publix, Walgreens, CVS, Walmart, you pick it, they can't even find people to give the quantity to that are available. So we're now going to flip into more of the vaccine hesitancy space and see if we can convince some folks that haven't had their vaccine to go get it. So we made it as simple as we could this week. Now we've published a website you can register at and have them come to you, or a phone number you can call and register, and they will come to you as well. So please avail yourself to that or pass that along if you know people that are still in that space where they could be enjoying more freedom with a vaccine. We were effectively eliminated from being able to regulate any COVID restrictions in our city facilities by the governor last week. He issued an executive order that said that we could not have anything in place that would be as a result of COVID-19. So if and when you return to City Hall, you'll see that there's been several things changed. It looks more like normal, looks more like normal than it did maybe a year ago. Along with that, there's a push to move our meetings back to being public meetings as opposed to being Zoom meetings. So we have advertised and published that we'll do one more meeting in the month of May and have both a virtual component and an in-person component. And then as we move back into June, and most certainly in July, it's every expectation that the governor's state of emergency will expire, we'll be in a place where we no longer have a virtual participation option in public meetings. Our boards and committees will all need to be back in person, having their meetings in the virtual world, and engaging a public board or committee will have come officially to an end. So be ready for that, and we'll work towards that in July. Good event this past weekend with Fort Lauderdale's Air Show. A lot of people enjoyed it on the beach. Our soccer team's getting closer to winning at home this year. They had a draw 1-1 on Sunday. And we're looking forward to Memorial Day when we celebrate the Great American Beach Party. And then and 4th of July, we look to be back with a normal 4th of July celebration. So if you are awaiting fireworks over the beach, we're going to be able to get that to you this year. So still firming up the entertainment for that day, but there's some really good options out there, and hopefully we can come together with some celebration in July. If you've been on the beach, you've been on A1A or Seabreeze, you've seen the aquatic center start to go vertical for the first time. The dive tower that we've talked about, that 27-meter dive tower, is now visible from almost all places as you pass by the aquatic center. So we anticipate doing a topping out celebration of that tower on the 4th of July as well, to give you some perspective as to where and when that project will get done. So quick update on this, what was at one point a famous sewer pipe of 7.5 miles. We are down to the last 2 weeks of construction, and then about 45 days of rehabilitation and rehab on the roads to make sure that they're passable for when you drive over them. But that project that was hitting us in the face a year ago is within about 14 days of being complete and turned on. So that's a exciting milestone to be right around the corner. Obviously, tunnels have been in the discussions again just this week. We had representatives from the boring company here yesterday and today. They were overseeing some of the boring events that were being done to know what the geology is underneath the surface. They met individually with members of the commission, and that dialogue is continuing. To answer the question about can you put a tunnel in Florida, I'm not the engineer, but what they tell me is that there's an engineering solution around that, you know, it's not a function of whether or not it can be built. It's just the materials that they use to be able to build it. So that was very, very clear that they are confident they can build here as easy as they can build in Texas or Minnesota or in Las Vegas. Believe it or not, the Las Vegas tunnel is lower than the water table. So they have an example of a tunnel that is completely underwater in Vegas. We always think of Vegas being the desert, I guess, but you know, out there you don't have to go far underground before you hit water in certain places. So I've got some examples of how that works. So exciting stuff going on. Partner that with building a budget for next year. That's always a summer project. We ramp up and try to get as much done before we can, before the commission goes on their break this summer. And you know, we'll just be pushing these last 4 meetings before that break happens to get as much accomplished as we can, so that we stay active over the summer months. With that, I'd be happy to you know, talk about anything that's on your mind, anything specific that I didn't mention. Sometimes we have better dialogue when I listen to what you all have interest in as opposed to what I think is interesting. So I'm here and ready for any topic you want to talk about.
Great. So we have, wow, 3 hands raised, and also just a reference point for HB1. If there's something the city, not officially, but is there a sense about that, given that we have heard from other law enforcement agencies, kind of the perspective on that legislation and how it's actually being applied on a local level? I don't know if you want to answer that first or last, but we have Mary and Marilyn and Leanne with questions other than that question. So do you want
to? First, why don't I start there and then we'll see where we go with the other questions. So House Bill 1, piece of legislation often referred to as the anti-riot bill, gives law enforcement some ability in a violent type encounter protest to take additional actions that they weren't able to take prior to that bill becoming a law. I can tell you I'm not a fan of going out there on the record and saying, you know, there's this law that exists in our state, but we're going to choose not to enforce it. That's a pretty slippery slope in my estimation. Is you know, when does that stop and when does that start? But here's what I want you to know, is that, you know, even with this piece of legislation that turns into law out there, Fort Lauderdale is, and I believe will always be, a community that values a voice, that values different voices. We're not looking to go out there and pick fights with our police agency and those that may have a different view or want to express their opinion. So, you know, we've got a very level-headed police chief, interim police chief and command staff. I've been in that with them in rooms when they've been having to make decisions, and I can tell you that we have always made a decision on the side of erring on allowing the voice to occur. So you won't see anything put out by our department that says we're not going to enforce the law. That would almost be like we're saying we're not going to enforce the speeding law, or we're not going to enforce any other, the burglary law. That is the law in Florida at this point, and we're supportive, whether we agree or disagree. We're supportive of the laws that exist at the time. But I can guarantee you and our community that much discretion will be used, erring on the side of a tremendous amount of caution in support of people being able to speak and say what they want to say. So hopefully that's a position on HB1 there. And Marilyn, Mary, and Leanne, that's the order they're in on my screen. I don't know how they are on yours, but Marilyn.
Thank you, Chris. I'm actually looking forward to going back to in-person commission meetings. I think that's the way to go. But I was struck by the online options and how many more people were able to participate online, as opposed to, get in the car and going down to City Hall. Have you thought about a hybrid situation where you could have the meetings back, but still allow an option for people to participate online?
I have, and I've discussed that at pretty good length with the city attorney. So there's a couple of things that we want to make sure we get right. And then there's a couple of things we think we might have a little bit more flexibility with. When we believe we need to be back in person based upon all the different orders expiring and not anything that is quasi judicial that requires the swearing in and the accepting of testimony, we think that for certain needs to come back into the same place so that some of those procedural things can happen. I think we got somewhat of a pass in the quasi judicial things that online oath is accepted because of the times we were in. I'm not sure how much longer we want to test that. I do think that we will probably have some ability to phase back where we might allow some online participation through the month of June. But based upon where we are with the existing orders, I think the only thing that will control after July the 1st is the resolution that we have adopted as a city that allows for virtual participation in certain circumstances, and it's fairly narrow. But that option will still exist if one of those conditions or criteria are met. But I don't think after July the 1st, we're going to have the option.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Mary.
Good evening. I have actually two questions. One's pretty simple. When you were talking about the sewer construction being finished in about 14 days, I believe I heard that correctly. Does that also include Bayview Drive, which has been closed for, a very long time? There seems to be a little problem, Bayview and 21st Street. Do you know if that also includes that area?
It should include that area for the construction of the pipe itself. And so beyond the 14 days, we still have the rehab to do. So we'll be re-blacktopping and doing all that work. That takes about 45 days after the 2 weeks. So I'm targeting that the pipe will be turned on in the next 14 days from end to end. And then we will finish that surface work. And we've got one place there on Bayview to do, one place on 15th Avenue. If you are used to going up to Oakland Park up 15th Avenue and you've been cut off there at Poinsettia Heights, those would be the roads that we would be hopefully getting back open as soon as those last pipes are connected.
Okay. And then the other question I have is very different. The other day on the front page of the Sun Sentinel, there was a pretty big article about the Kushner project that's west of the city, just west of the city off of Broward Boulevard. And I know here in Coral Ridge, when we have a developer or somebody come in with a big project, nobody's ever come with a project that big. They do contact us and we work with them. We always try to get something from them, like what are they going to do for the neighborhood or the area? When a big project like that comes to the city, I mean, that's a pretty big project if that does happen. Does the city do the same thing? Or does the city just say, well, great, you're going to come in and make the city look nicer? Or are there other requests? Because that project is so big, it's going to affect multiple neighborhoods, if not just all of us. So I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, what I can tell you to this point is we always like to work with development partners. We're not partners in the development, but I would rather work with somebody that wanted to be our partner as a neighbor in our city, as opposed to somebody that just wants to come in and build according to the letter of what the code allows and get in and get out. I can tell you that the Kushner Development Group has been very accommodating thus far. We've had some really good discussions, and they seem open to wanting to be a true community partner. So what I would think would make good sense there would be to invite them to maybe your next meeting like this and hear it from them directly. But I think they would bring a sizable investment to the city if the project moves forward. I do think they have interest in figuring out how to work with us, not against us. No, we're interested as well in benefiting the city through these development projects if they happen. Of course, if there's any infrastructure requirements that have to be met to be able to allow the construction to occur, they're responsible for that, as well as any associated impact fee that goes along with the impact that they would bring based upon the development. So I've got a good feel about this one. That doesn't mean that it won't change tomorrow and I all of a sudden come next month and say, gosh, something happened. I just don't have a good feel, but it's been a very cordial and accommodating and wanting to be a neighbor, as opposed to your book says I can build this height and therefore I'm going to build it. So so far so good.
Thank you.
Leanne.
Hi, Mr. Lagerbloom.
Hey.
I guess I'm looking for more of a procedural question, because I'm here sitting as the president of our civic association, and I've got my members asking me all the time for updates, and I'm not really, so I've got a, communication going with our membership that's pretty good, but we're having, we have a little bit of difficulty when we ask the city for status on things or input to things. And I don't know if it's because I'm not using the right process or what the situation is. And so, we're very concerned about the P3 because it's in our neighborhood, and because it's we really were hoping the master plan could be implemented, but it's kind of like it's even a bigger issue than that. It's that we are really trying to get our citizens very engaged in the city and becoming, great neighbors to each other and all of that. But then I feel like I'm really letting down my residents because I'm not able to get their input into the mix. So,
okay, so let me ask this question then, just quickly in response, then I'll try to give you an answer. Are you talking about the Kushner project we just talked about, or are you talking about One Stop?
I'm talking about the P3, One Stop.
Oh, the one-stop shop. Okay. So there will still be multiple. So there's always the public process, and then there's always the information gathering and conversation process that goes along with the project. The part of the project that we've moved through procedurally is the unsolicited proposal has been delivered upon the city. The city commission has weighed in and said, yes, we want to move forward. We advertised it for a period of time in which it received no other competing projects. So that's where we are procedurally. The next thing that would happen is we would negotiate to either an interim or a comprehensive agreement. If we can get to either of those two things, that would take into account the business deal, the lawfulness of it, conformity with the statute in section 255 of the code. If that all happens, then that interim agreement or comprehensive agreement would come back to the city commission for them to say, yeah, we still think this is the right thing to do, or no, we don't. So your biggest voice right now in that project is in the elected officials, as well as engaging those that have delivered the proposal. I think they're open and willing to talk about it.
Michael's shaking his head no. They will not tell us anything, but we have, and so we've
Leanne,
asked.
Can I interrupt? We are running way late tonight. Could we possibly organize kind of an offline conversation with you and Mr. Lagerbloom, perhaps Mr. Gassman? Because I think we're trying to get to the bottom of that particular project on behalf of your neighborhood for that project, and communication seems to be at the core of the issue. But rather than take up time tonight to go through procedural kind of things, could I like parking lot this and ask that you follow up with Chris and Steve after the call? Would that be okay?
Sure. I think it's a general question, but definitely if you would prefer us to take it offline, we'll be happy to do that.
Okay, all right. I apologize. It's just 8:05. We're supposed to kind of end around 8-ish if we can most months. So Chris, if that's all right with you, is that acceptable for you? Okay.
At your pleasure.
Okay. All right. So Chris, thank you so much again for coming this month. Exciting updates, and look forward to having you back in June. And just a reminder.
One last topic. Can I do one last topic just because it came to mind? I want you all to know that we are moving rapidly forward with the selection of a permanent police chief. So I think that's important that I start to articulate that now. We had several, 44, I think, applicants, both internal and external to our department. Looks to be some fairly talented police executives, police leaders from around the nation, as well as from Fort Lauderdale. And we've taken that, and as recent as yesterday, have taken it down to a group of what I'm calling semi-finalists, of people that I want to actually interact with in person. There will be community forums, there will be opportunities to engage, there will be an assortment of ways to become tuned in to that selection process. So watch for that. I'll try to distribute that information through the council if I can to the neighborhoods, because it's very important to me that we have your interaction with and feedback on the different candidates as we make this selection. We're still on track to make a late June, potentially early July decision in that selection. So watch between now and your next meeting. Please watch for information on community ways to interact with police chief candidates. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. We really appreciate you. And we're going to move on to our final agenda items: neighborhood round robin, treasurer's report, the audit committee report, and the one item we're going to vote on, which is review and acceptance of last month's meeting minutes. We have one person signed up for the 60-second round robin. That is none other than Dr. William Getz. I'm going to give you sharing of screen privileges here, Dr. Getz, and then you will be ready to go and share your screen. And just a reminder to all, for those that are new to this, right? This is 60 seconds to share the joy of your community, basically an elevator pitch for your neighborhood. So we have different neighborhoods come month to month. Dr. Getz is up for this month. I will stop sharing, and Dr. Getz, turn the floor over to you.
Uh-oh. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Shoot.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Go. Bermuda Riviera is a small community of 250 single-family homes located on the Barrier Island on the intercoastal side of A1A across from the Gulf Ocean Mile. With only one vehicular entrance, we have one of the lowest crime rates in the city. It's a short walk from the beach. There's a well-established shopping center right across A1A and many great restaurants nearby. We have a long linear park along our major feeder street that's well shaded with a long meandering sidewalk that is perfect for walking. Half the homes are on finger canals on the water, making it a protected haven for anyone owning a boat. Overall, it's a quiet, well-protected community that is a welcome refuge from the hustle of Fort Lauderdale's busy streets. It's an eclectic family neighborhood, and while several families of bunnies have taken up residence here, no one named Murphy currently lives in the community.
That's fabulous. Yay, Dr.
And here's our bunnies.
That was great. Highlighting the bunnies. That's awesome. Bermuda Riviera. Great neighborhood. Great job, Dr. Getz. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. So we do not have a meeting in July. So if anyone wants to sign up to do a a round robin next month, please let us know. We'd love to have you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melinda, our wonderful treasurer, to go over the treasurer's report. And Melinda, when you're ready, over to you.
Okay, thanks so much. And Colleen, I don't know if you want me to share. You have disabled screen sharing for me, but not a big deal. I can quickly take you through the numbers here. That's fine. So,
Melinda, you're a co-host now, sorry.
Okay, no worries. Okay, I'll go ahead and share this real quick. All right, everyone. So I'll make this pretty quick. We've only had a little bit of activity since I spoke to you on April 13. SunTrust account is at 12,160. The PayPal account is gone up to 1,882. Total for our association is in dollars is $14,042.51. And we did get some 4 payments since the last membership meeting, 2 checks, one from Melrose Manor, one from Tarpon River Civic, and then 2 PayPal payments. We got money from Chula Vista and Coral Ridge Isles Civic. And that is basically it. I've provided the board with our summary of everyone who's paid for this fiscal year. So we're up to 42 members. So I'll take any comments or questions.
That's fabulous, Melinda. And I think just as always, great appreciation and great job for the great work you do. Thank you. Okay, so second to last agenda item, audit committee report, Jim and Marilyn. I don't know if you have a written document or whether you just want to share verbally the audit for our last year and the year prior finances.
Thank you, Colleen, and thanks to Melinda for her help in putting together these audits. Jim and I reviewed not only this year's audit, but the previous year, because when we were in COVID, we did not do an audit for the previous year. So I'm just going to read it, and then the papers will be submitted. So I'm just going to read the council's audit committee report dated May 11, 2021 for the period April 2019 to March 2020. So here goes, very quickly. Per the bylaws, we examined the council's bank statements and PayPal account for the period of April 2019 to March 2020, which corresponds to the council's business year. The beginning balance was $6,158.07. Total deposits in that period of time were $6,676.80, which included memberships and other miscellaneous deposits, such as the CD, which matured at $5,099.95. In the same period of time, we had expenses of $2,219.85. So the ending balance was $10,615.02, which corresponds to the bank statements. Just a quick breakdown of the expenses during this period of time. We spent on post office box registration, website hosting, those kinds of administrative items, $451.60. We spent on food and drink and supplies for meetings and celebrations, $1,668.25. And we did a charity sponsorship for the Fort Lauderdale Forum of $100. So the total amount of disbursements was $2,219.85. Furthermore, all the checks and PayPal disbursements were made out to persons known to the organization and for items approved by the organization. This is respectfully submitted by both myself, Marilyn Mamano, and Jim Concanon. And that is the audit report for the year April 2019 to March 20. And now Jim will be giving the next report. Jim, over to you.
Well, thanks, Marilyn. Let me put on my official auditor's glasses so that this comes off correct. And I'd like to note that this is a nonpartisan audit performed by people who have experience doing audits. So I've been tasked with performing the audit or reporting the audit from April 2020 to March 21. According to the bylaws, as Marilyn mentioned, this is a requirement that we usually report during the May general meeting. So here is the rundown for that fiscal year. As you all know, that was a COVID year, so we really didn't have a whole lot of expenses. Our beginning balance on April the 1st, 2020 was $10,615.02. Our total deposits, this reflects the membership dues, was $1,255. Our expenses were next to nothing because of COVID, because we weren't in person, we didn't have any activities, we didn't buy any food. Those total expenses were $159.56, which left an ending balance on March 31st of this year of $11,710.46. To break that down, post office box, and these are the recurring expenses we have every year. Post office box was registration and the website hosting. It was $70. Food, drinks, supplies, all that came to $89.56, and that probably reflects from what happened at the very beginning of that period. Our total check disbursements, again, were $159.56. We monitored the PayPal account, disbursements in there. They were made out to persons known to the organization for items we all approved. Again, we respectfully submit this report. If anyone has any detailed questions, we would be happy to take that offline. It's been submitted by Marilyn for the year, the fiscal year 2019 to 2020, and my report for April 2020 to March 2021. And a big shout out to Melinda Bowker for providing us access to the checking account, the PayPal account, and all of the information that we needed to perform this audit accurately. Thank you very much, Melinda. And that's our report.
Very pleased with your findings.
I'm sure you are.
Bravo to you guys, the audit committee and Melinda. So, you know, it was mentioned, right? In our bylaws, we are required to conduct a financial audit, right? Every year, looking and to make sure that we have ethical practices financially. Not every HOA requires an audit, right? But it is good practice. And as long as you have access to the banking account and you can, you know, conduct the audit trail of all the transactions, it's good to have that as something in your HOA as well. John, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I have a question. Do you guys have a cost for your constant contact subscription, or do you leverage somebody else's for free?
Mary? Melinda?
Melinda?
Yeah, we certainly do have a cost, and to be honest, I will have to get back to you, John, on that exact amount. I don't have that in front of me.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's a way that we can leverage. I mean, all the associations, or a lot of associations, have newsletters electronically. If there's a way of leveraging the annual subscription, it might be interesting.
John, can I speak to that? I've talked about this on numerous occasions. My civic association has a constant contact account, as do, I imagine, numbers of associations. It's very, very cost effective because you get the not-for-profit rate. So you can get a full constant contact account for $168 a year, but they only let you do one. In other words, you can't do multiples. Okay. So we've never been able to leverage. We've always, you know, had to buy our own, a reasonable amount of money.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a good question. Where there are benefits for economies of scale, right? We considered this for D&O insurance. Great suggestion for constant contact, but we will continue to look at options because constant contact is driven by the volume of emails that you have, right? That's what it's based on. There's not really a leverageability or an economy of scale for sharing that license or that account. Melinda, did you want to say something?
Oh, no, you guys, Marilyn and you have covered it well. Thank you.
Okay. Louise, you had your hand raised?
I do have my hand raised, and I was going to say that South Middle River switched from Constant Contact to MailChimp for reasons of price. We don't really do so many mailings, and it was costing more money, I guess. I was not participant on the decisions, but I know that they went to MailChimp.
Yeah, a lot of people go to MailChimp because it is less expensive, but it's certainly less sophisticated. And I believe it's less easy to use, but that's only me. But it is certainly less sophisticated and you have less options. But the savings is undeniable. And if you use it very rarely, it certainly makes economic sense.
We are not sophisticated up here.
The judgment about the sophistication level, because MailChimp does have a lot of capability and functionality. We use it. I know a lot of organizations that use MailChimp as a preference to constant contact templates are a little bit provincial, let's just say. So
Okay.
yeah,
I take that back. We are sophisticated.
Yeah. And I take it back. That was my personal opinion. So everybody has their own view of these things.
And if I could add one more question, if anybody has access to like a website manager, it would be interesting again where you can leverage any consulting help with website management.
So I'll tell you what, this is a really good segue. I mean, one of the things that we're working on is a neighborhood toolkit, which sections on everything that you would consider. And so that will actually be one of the sections and a great conversation to have that we'll look forward to, hopefully next month, as soon as next month. So final item on the agenda is review and acceptance of minutes from last month's general meeting of April 13th. Any discussion before we call for a motion to approve?
I move to approve.
Second?
Second.
Seconds. Any opposed? Okay, great. Minutes pass. With that, we are close to adjourning the meeting. Just next meeting dates. Board meeting is May 24th, and our general meeting is June 8th. And we will not be meeting in July. So we'll skip from June to August for the general meeting. And we'll also talk at the board level about when we go back in person, right? And how soon and where and when. So we'll be back in touch about that. Thank you all for your patience for staying on.
Colleen, second. We don't have a July general membership. Do we have a board?
No, we do not have a June board and we do not have a July general meeting. So
okay.
It's June.
When is the general meeting again?
It's on the website. Let me just pull up the next general meeting is June 8th.
June 8th. Okay, thank you very much.
And all the meeting dates, monthly meeting dates are on the council website, CFLCA.org. Registration links, agendas, meeting minutes, the recordings of these meetings, they're all posted there. All right, so thank you all very much. It's 8:23, a little bit longer than usual, but I think very worthwhile information shared tonight from Dr. Gassman, from Chris.
Luggage rack in here.
And the wonderful 60-second round robin from Dr. Getz. So thank you all very much for your great questions. Have a great evening. Thank you, Betty, for being on tonight. We'll see y'all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen. Great meeting.
Nice meeting.
See ya.
Well done.